Well, welcome everybody to episode 11 of the Community Cloudcast for May of 2022. I say a welcome to my fellow co-hosts, Paul McCollum and Jason Himmelstein. Howdy, fellas.
Greetings.
How do?
How goes things in your worlds? All good?
So far, so good. Good to be back home. I was out at a conference for a little bit, and I was on campus for a little bit, and it's good to be back home. Although with school ending, I don't know if that was the right choice. So because my office
to stay away a
is
while.
about to get invaded here, and because there be dragons coming. So
Loud ones.
yeah.
Yeah. Understood.
Yeah, I have that problem too. Anytime a FedEx package shows up, mine just bark until I yell at them and then they stop. It's terrible. Total chaos. I know exactly what you guys are going through.
Yeah, sure you do.
Oh, yeah.
Well, just a reminder to everyone watching that we are typically on the third Thursday of every month or thereabouts. We had to delay it last week due to some unforeseen circumstances, but we try and get as close as we possibly can. You can watch us on the YouTubes or over on Facebook. Pick one of those links, whatever works for you. Feel free to put your comments in. We'll see them throughout the show. We'll post interesting comments as they come through. We'll try and respond to everybody who has questions as we go through. You can always go and leave comments on our YouTube channel, of course, after the fact, and we'll try to respond to those in a timely fashion as well. I want to thank our sponsors, of course, Aptigent at the top of the show here. You can go to aptigent.com for more information on power tools. New releases coming soon. Have some big back-end changes coming in the next few months, so the releases have been delayed a little bit. As I get all of those things sorted out, we streamline the onboarding experience, but it'll be much better when it's all said and done. Upcoming events that I have on the calendar, I know there's some more, and I never got around to putting together a proper sort of calendar view here, but few things in the fall. European Cloud Summit, of course, that is the Azure/cloud version. That is not Collab Summit, so it's not Microsoft Office 365 focused. That is at the end of September. North American Collaboration Summit, that's Branson, Missouri in October. We've got a slide for that a little bit later on as well. Collab Days Belgium, I know is happening in October. I'm sure there's a couple more coming. And Jason, I always ask you this. I know there's a couple other things that, on the calendar. I forgot to put the one on here for Dallas. Is that still happening in August?
It is August 8th through the 12th. 365 EduCon Dallas is happening. This one in Seattle just happened. It was really, really good. They're also, in addition to being 365 EduCon, they're also doing their Power Platform Conference. And I got to say, the Power BI attendance was really, really good this time. And people got a lot out of it. It was a great time.
Cool. Good. I'll make sure I get that on the calendar next time. I keep forgetting to add that one, but that'll be right here in Irving. So lots of things coming up. I know, Paul, you just had your user group meeting last night, your Salesforce user group meeting that's now in person as well as virtual, yeah?
Yep. We're back meeting live at the UTD campus. It's a little bit, I think it's summer break then now, so our student attendance is down a little bit, but still had a good session last night from a developer evangelist, now called developer advocate, showing some of the tightly coupled and connected stuff you can do with Slack inside of the Salesforce ecosystem. So always good. It's fun being able to see Teams and Slack kind of keep each other competing and keeping those features moving forward.
Cool. Anything new that the presenter brought up, or any news that you've heard about lately?
So Southeast Dreamin' conference is coming up. I may be traveling to that. I've got to check schedule and timing with project. So maybe speaking over there. That's the same town as my client. So I may co-op that trip together for something. So maybe that'll be a good one. No other big news that I have seen happen recently. Nothing at least at the cloud perspective. I could bore you with all the release notes that have gone on, but nothing that really changes the architectural ecosystem kind of at the cloud level that we deal with.
All right. Well, one thing that has happened quite recently, this week, as a matter of fact, is Microsoft Build. And there's always a lot of announcements and things that come out of that. And I know that Jason had quite a bit of information on that on their recent podcast at the Bifocal show. So, Jason, you want to summarize what's been happening in the Power BI world?
All the things, Eric. All the things, all the news that's been held for pretty much the whole year, we just got in like a whole week. And, Build was part of it. So this is the list that's in the blog post. So if you go out to bifocal.show, we did episode 226, dropped it yesterday. So we recorded it before Arun's session. So the top link there is going to be Arun Ulag's session with Priya Safi. And they had a couple customers on there as well. A lot of good demos where they talked about several of these points I'm going to mention here. But they did a lot of good demo there. They also, the Guy in a Cube YouTube channel did an amazing demo of the new Power BI Data Mart feature. That is the next generation of what is happening in Power BI. So we've had data flows for quite a while, which is that extract and transform. We had a load of data, a shape of data in the cloud, but we didn't have a way of doing transform in the cloud before. And now what we've got with Data Marts is we extend that capability. So this is, as Matthew Roche called it on his blog post on the, I believe it's ssbipolar.com. If you go out to his site, you'll find his post about it. It's data flows with benefits. The product team doesn't really like it when we call it that, but that's exactly what this really is it takes that data flows concept and attaches this, this thing in the cloud now where all of a sudden we're able to do all the transform, all that Power Query goodness. We get to take that extracted data and do that transformation. So that it's not just that extract and load side of it where we just have a shape of data and now we have to do something with it with Power BI Desktop. But instead, we actually, Eric, this is something you're going to like. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
As a Mac user, you now can do transformation. You never were able to do that before. You had to have a Windows machine in order to do it because Power BI Desktop, it required a Windows machine. Now you can start to do this transformation stuff that we've been doing in Power BI Desktop for years. Now it's just the beginnings, okay? And there are limitations to it out of the gates, right? So we're not talking about terabytes of data today. What we're talking about is up to about 100 gigs worth of data that you can pull in using this data flow. And then the data mart, the data flow actually gets created for you automatically when you create a data mart. You go off and you specify which data sources you want to be able to pull in, pulls it all together, lays out the tables. You can create your relationships. You can do your transformations, all sorts of great stuff. Now, again, there are limitations. This is a preview feature. It's not perfect. It's not been tested for 6 years, and now we're just rolling it out. This is a brand new thing that's being brought to us. And the testing that I've done thus far has been good. There are definite spots along the way where we go, oh, well, that'll be nice to have eventually, right? But there are so many good things about this that it's worth going off and taking a look at. A couple of points about it, though. It does require either a premium per capacity, which is the expensive backend SKU stuff, either a P SKU or an A SKU if you're buying premium capacities, or premium per user, which is that $20 per user per month license that's inclusive of Pro. So that's how you get all of that. So that's the massive, huge, completely brand new announcement. The other things that are out there, Power BI Goals. We've had Power BI Goals for roughly a year now. And then Microsoft 365 went off and bought this company called Ally, right? Which does the similar thing, right? They both do OKRs, objectives and key results. Now, we saw this sort of convergence coming because at 365 EduCon in Seattle 2 weeks ago, Jeff Teeper announced that Ally is now being renamed to Viva Goals. So we have Viva Goals, and we have Power BI Goals, and they do the similar thing. So that was kind of funky. So what happened at Build? They announced, number one, Power BI Goals is now renamed to Power BI Metrics, and it's now generally available. Now, when it was first released, it was a premium only feature. It is a pro feature, not a premium only feature. So Power BI Metrics, which allows you to tie objectives and key results back to data in your data sets, like really cool stuff. You can create all of this, and you're able to take a look at the metrics and truly measure what you're doing in your organization. We use it all the time on the CAT team. It's very cool stuff. I'm still not great with it. Somebody else had already built it, so I'm still playing with it. But I'll tell you, John and I are going to interview Trev Gott, who's another, who's an MVP in Office Apps and Services. But he's also a Power BI guy. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he's trying to get MVP in data platform as well, and should be. But Trev's going to be on our show on the podcast here coming up in a couple of weeks. So we're getting a good interview with him. So we'll go in depth on that on the podcast. Now, the one that the collaboration people are going to really like, Paul, you may know a little bit about this from your days back in the SharePoint world way back ago. But Eric, I know you remember this. Do you remember the Power View feature that was in Power Pivot for SharePoint, where you could take and embed a Power View into a PowerPoint and it worked live as long as you were on the same backend network? Mm-hmm. How cool that was. And then they took it away and we all cried. It's been gone for like 10 years. It's been a long time. Well, we now get that same type of feature, only much better in Power BI. So we now get integration to be able to bring in a Power BI report into a PowerPoint slide. It is fully integratable, meaning I can slice and I can dice and I can work with that report. I can't edit, but this is showing the report right on the Power BI slide. I can pause the state of it so that if I click on it, I'm not going to do anything to it, or I can have it where it's fully able to be sliced. So when you pull up a slide in an executive briefing, let's take a look at the sales numbers. You can actually go click on all the things. Really cool. We're saving just an image. Because what we had before was you saved an image, and that was crap. Let's just be honest. It was not good. This is the experience that we've been waiting for, and it's live out there for you. If it's not showing up in your PowerPoint today, number one, you have to be on a Microsoft 365 version, I believe, of Office. So you have to have the subscription. But if you don't have it showing up between the Forms button and the other buttons over there in the add-ins section on the Insert tab, what you can do is you can go out to add-ins. You can add it from the Office store, and it will show up for you there. You just go look for Power BI, and it works like a champ. So those are a couple of big announcements that happened. I was super excited by all three of those. There's one other thing that came out that was really big last week for me, and it's the very, very beginnings of something great. And that is what they've called exportable tables in the Power BI service. Now, what this is this is the beginning of paginated reports being authored in the service. And this does not require a premium workspace. It does require a modern workspace, or a V2 workspace is what we used to call them. We are now referring to them as modern workspaces. But what you can do is you can go to your data set and you can click on it and you can go show me an exportable table, and you can author what looks like a paginated report, like what you would build in Report Builder. You can author this. It's very limited right now, but it's the beginning. Okay. And you can get an exportable table. You can save into your workspace. Now you do have to have a pro license because this is a sharing feature, right? But you're able to do all of this, and it's able to be exported out to Excel, out to PDF, all of the file formats that a paginated report can be exported to. This function can be exported to. This is not full paginated reports. You still, if you want to do all of those great things, you still have to author in Report Builder, but it gives you the beginnings of that functionality. You can see where this is going. And to me, it's really cool. And it's pro. It's not premium, which means that this is accessible to everybody. So those were a couple things. Cool. There are other things here in the list that you can go click into, and it's all the blog post information. Highly recommend people go off and do that. But in the interest of time and not wanting to chew up all of the time for this conversation, I wanted to just highlight those big things for me.
Yeah, good stuff. I'll make sure we get all of those links into the show description on the YouTube channel so people can go check that out. Good stuff.
Thank you.
All right, some Azure announcements to cover off this month. Few things that jumped out at me. The first was the Bastion client support, where your desktop applications can access your VMs with a secure tunnel. So you get that native sort of desktop to cloud integration via the Bastion mechanism. I haven't used that. I've seen a couple of videos. One thing that I do use that I was complaining about a few months ago on this very show, and hopefully has been drastically improved, are the modifications and updates to the web application firewall with the new rule sets. And hopefully those are being implemented properly so that we can stop excluding some of the rules because they weren't working. Specifically around some XML and JSON content types and whatnot into the APIs. Those are missing and being trapped by the header inspectors as they came through. It was causing us some problems. As well as the increased size limits, 2 meg per request on the app firewall. Of course, you can put larger requests through there. It just doesn't do its inspection on things larger than, or deep inspection on thing larger than 2 megs. So that's good improvement there, and it seems to be working its way to be more of an enterprise class product. I'm not sure I can say it is at the moment, but it's getting there. So a few build announcements that I picked up on is the dev box. I love this feature, and it's really not any whiz bang thing, but it's predetermining a dev build configuration and as a VM that you can then spin up in your organization. So if you kind of thinking back to the way we used to do SharePoint development, it would take days to get a box set up properly to do development. And developers had to carry around these big workstations and whatnot. It was a real hassle. Well, lots of enterprise workloads still require that kind of configuration. Heck, just setting it up for modern development with all the NPM packages and all that stuff that you have to do if you're supporting multiple platforms is a challenge. So the dev box allows you to pre-create those VMs in your organization. You can turn them on or off. Developers can manage that themselves. You can set time limits on them to disable so they're not burning compute when you don't need it. So I think this is a really cool feature. I think it's a preview at the moment. One that caught my eye just because it was part of the announcement is the intelligent data platform. And Jason probably knows about this, but it sounds to me like that's just a packaging of things that are already there, right? Am I wrong on that, Jason? So Jason is on mute.
No. I said all the things I can say. Yeah, that was. No, this feels like an organizational shift. Intelligent data platform. We've seen. Sorry, Nate has decided to join us for the show today. Paul, I'm surprised that we don't have any of your usual guests hanging out with us, but this it was definitely a cool thing to see come out. Some of the organizational shifts that we've seen that are public out there. It feels more like a smart thing. We saw the Azure Purview changes that were happening and all of that type of stuff. And, all the fun things that we're seeing with Power BI, with Synapse, all of those things, all that coming together under Arun. Lots of cool stuff happening as far as the intelligent data platform is concerned. So.
Yeah, so that was a cool announcement. And then one that caught my eye as well is the GitHub OpenID Connect integration with Azure AD. This is big. If you're not a super geeky dev like me, you may not understand, but one of the biggest exploits on GitHub is people that have bots that go through GitHub repos and pull out client IDs and secrets out of your repos, and then they use them to compromise your Azure and AWS and whatnot. And it's a common problem. You put them in your web config files. It's necessary to get your applications to work, but then you don't do you forget to do the transforms properly, and they end up in your GitHub repo. Bad news. So Microsoft has enabled OIDC or OID Connect, so that you don't have to store secrets anymore. There's a GitHub workflow, or I forget what they call it, but it's a workflow that you can run that will go out and get your tokens from Azure AD for your environment and use that during your deploy sequence. So
And I really
that's
like
a
the
good one.
fact that they have the bots out there that they're scanning for these things as well. I thought that was really smart. I was watching Donovan's part of the session and everything, and I thought that was really great. Because that was always a big bugaboo. 15 years ago when I was running DevOps shops back. We'd have to go manually looking through all that code to see, did somebody hard code something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you don't want to hard code stuff. Like, this is the kind of thing where we can go and start scanning for that type of stuff automatically. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, Eric, was I didn't hear the word Azure DevOps being mentioned nearly as much this build around. Heard a lot of GitHub, but not a lot of Azure DevOps.
Oh yeah. I wonder what that portends.
I don't know. I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, I hope that doesn't portend a shift in that direction. I personally can't stand the uber geekiness that's required just to get GitHub to do even the most basic things. It's cool when it works, but getting it to do it reminds me of the old days of TFS, and trying to actually make it do something in an automated fashion was a nightmare. I love Azure DevOps, so I hope that isn't moving in the wrong direction. Maybe it was just the year to do GitHub stuff because they needed to show some activity after spending a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
But we shall see. We shall see.
Are there any other
moving
competitors in the space as far as Azure DevOps that are being used? Salesforce has a bunch of third-party tools that are running around doing code orchestration with GitHub that maybe Azure DevOps is fits in that same space. Are there third-party competitors that are maybe moving in and Microsoft's moving out of the way for?
I don't know. There are quite a few of them out there that I hear from time to time that are competing with DevOps in the non-Microsoft space. But I think it would be a huge shift to move away from DevOps. That would be a major directional change. It could happen.
Yeah, I don't have the inside knowledge on this. It was kind of an interesting thing. I heard lots of GitHub, just an observation.
Yeah,
just thought it was interesting.
Something for us to keep an eye on for sure.
Cool.
So let's move into our primary topic, which is talking about Claude for me to say today. Claude architecture. Cloud architecture. This grew from a discussion that Paul and I were actually having, talking about various things that we might want to discuss, and we actually started digging into this. And I thought, this would be a good thing for us to talk about, and defining, first of all, what is a cloud architect? Before we even get to the point of what do they do or why would we need one, but what is one? Because the definition seems to be a little ephemeral, right? It's like I know one when I see one. Kind of thing. But what do they actually do? So I went out and found a couple of definitions that I thought we could toss around here. And the first one is about designing. I'm not so sure about the developing part, but designs, develops, implements, and maintains a company's cloud computing strategy, requiring deep technical knowledge of the various components, which sounds more hands-on, deeply technical than the second definition, which is more of an IT pro, almost managerial sounding. I tend to think of cloud architects more being in line with the first definition than the second, but what do you all think?
So if you ask me, the defining what an architect is the harder part of that. And I keep getting in trouble with my definition of the word architect being, if you put an adjective in front of architect, it means somebody that assembles solutions from different components. So if you're an Azure architect, are you a cloud architect? Are you that cloud? Are you an Azure architect? If you only assemble solutions in one platform or in one tier, is that an architect? Are you solutioning within a platform? To me, an architect has always been something that brought a bunch of different components together and assembled different sub solutions, or an assemblage of components that deliver sub solutions. So engineers building those components out, programmers, developers, analysts, and then an architect is kind of aligning the cars together, but not inside each of the cars, setting the destination, setting the cars, forecasting the tracks. So to me, that's an architect. It's got a little abused in the Salesforce system as far as, an architect is basically everybody. Everybody's an architect. You're developing, you're clicking, you're configuring, you're being an administrator. If you're building a solution, you're an architect. And I kind of disagree with that architects really, to me, and this is opening up this for the discussion, you have to be working in, to call yourself an architect, you have to know multiple systems, not just one. To me, a senior person in one particular system is a senior engineer. You are orchestrating, but in a very defined space.
Jason?
So I'll give you an unpopular answer.
Oh, that answer's already unpopular.
So once you get a cloud architect designs, develops, implements, and maintains a company's cloud computing strategy. The term strategy is the key word there. That when you start to think about developing and implementing, these are not folks who are actively doing something. As far as building, that's when you get to an engineer, right? Everybody's an architect, so nobody is, right? That's not how this works. An architect is someone, when you look at it from the pure definition of art, what is an architect? An architect, someone who designs the building, right? When you look at it, they're not someone who's going and laying the foundation. That's a general, you're hiring general contractors to do those things. When we start to abstract this out, right? An architect is the person who comes up with the plans, is the person who has the strategy, is the person who has to have a broader picture. It's the head coach, overseeing, or the general manager, if you're thinking sports teams, right? The person who's overseeing how things work. It's not the point guard. It's not the quarterback. It's not that person on the ground level doing the actual work. It's the person who is coming up with the strategy, right? And why is it important? Well, we're going to get to that in a few minutes, I'm sure. But these are the kinds of things that it's important to have an architect as someone who's laying out the roadmap for where you're trying to go. But it's not someone who is actively implementing. And that's why when you look at these words, somebody looks at it and goes, oh, I'm going to develop and implement and design, maintain, and they lose the last word there, which is they're doing the strategy. That's what an architect is a strategist, is the person who's coming up with the plan, laying it out for others, but not actually doing the implementation.
Do you agree with the second sentence there that does require deep technical knowledge?
So I think you have to have broad technical knowledge rather than deep technical knowledge, because to me, deep technical knowledge means that I need to be able to go all the way down the stack, right? And I want to be able to go to 500 level. That's not what you're looking for in an architect. You need to have someone who at least has 200 to 300 level, but not the 400 and 500 level. That's when you get to that point, is it nice to have that skill set? Absolutely. You're going to be better off for it. But that's not generally, if you're only at a 100 level, you're not architecting. Forgive me, CIO land, right? That's not an architect. That's someone laying out a broad general framework, not laying out the true strategy, the down level strategy to it. But does it require deep technical knowledge? I think you have to have technical knowledge, but the word deep is where I'd argue with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm with you. The strategy part is a little bit, it's trying to define an undefined term with another undefined term. If I'm designing the strategy for fields within my SQL table that I have built up, is that a strategy? And I think there's a definition. Yeah, it's strategy, but it's kind of, the focus is narrow. It has to be broad. It has to be a couple of different things, and it can't just mean senior. I've been at 100 level for 10 years, therefore I'm an architect. It's to me that there has to be breadth across multiple disciplines with some depth, not deep depth. At the engineer depth is that 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, but multiple 100 to 300s to be able to create a strategy that encompasses multiple disciplines. Sorry, Eric.
Well, I take, and this is what actually led to this whole discussion. I take issue with the idea that an architect has to be multi-cloud or across multiple vendors, providers, or stacks. It, if you take a look at Azure, Amazon, Google, each of the major platforms, throw in Oracle and IBM and all the rest of them as well. There are so many moving parts within those offerings that it takes someone at that level um, in order to implement or design or implement a strategy just for a organization that has chosen Azure as their cloud platform, right? An Azure senior engineer knows networking, or they know compute, or they know collab, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't know all the moving parts, right? I could never claim to be an Azure architect because I don't know all those other pieces outside of my senior engineer knowledge within a couple of pieces. So I contend that, to your original statement, which is saying, are you an Azure architect, or are you a Google architect, cloud architect, or are you a Amazon AWS cloud architect? That I agree with, but I don't think you need to have multi-cloud disciplinary knowledge to be an architect.
So I'm going to agree with you on that, Eric, because I don't. So when I think about an architect, I think multidiscipline, not necessarily multi-cloud,
yeah.
and I think that's the difference here. So I think that as an architect, you can't simply be a developer, right? You have to have an idea of the infrastructure side of it. You have to have an idea and understanding of the user impact side of it. That's the broader umbrella that I think of. Not necessarily that you have to know all of GCP and and AWS and Azure and all of the others and Alibaba in order to be a cloud architect. Now, I think that you have to have a breadth of knowledge, right, to be able to and prior in my prior role in my prior world, I considered myself to be a cloud solutions architect, not a cloud architect, but a solutions architect, someone who looked at things from a solution perspective and was able to architect solutions for business problems based upon the areas of expertise that I had knowledge in. But I was not the 900 level depth that I had on my team. I had to have people with that depth of knowledge, right? Who were the absolute expert on knowing how to configure this or that, but had to have that 200 to 300 level knowledge in order to be able to architect the overarching solution that I could hand off from team to team to team, but not necessarily from platform to platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Paul, what's your feeling on that?
So I agree with your disagreement on you can be there are enough disciplines within Azure for there to be Azure architects. You're not just an Azure engineer. There are enough disparate disciplines to say within Azure, within this space, I can be an architect. I think at that point, you're an Azure architect. If you know Azure, AWS, Heroku, GCP, I think that's a cloud architect because you're not saying, or maybe more accurately, it's a multi-cloud architect. But if you can't be a cloud architect and only know one cloud, you're an Azure architect, you're an AWS architect. So that's where I'm saying within Azure, there are enough disciplines that you need an architect. You need to know all those moving parts to be an Azure architect and not just a SQL Server administrator, a data modeler or something. You have to have a cross-discipline perspective and be able to decide, when you're weighing something, I want to do the best possible data modeling pathway, or I want to do the most efficient compute pathway. And the architect has to weigh those against the entire solution and pick a winner. And you have to have some cross-discipline to be able to set that strategy and decide whose ideal version of the story is going to win and where you're going to find middle ground. That's usually where the architect comes in, is understanding the weight of all those different disciplines and trying to put a value on one of IO cycles and then complexity of code. Weigh those, make that call. And to me, that makes the architect, is being able to say at a higher level across multiple disciplines, these are how we weigh these values. And yeah, licensing actually comes across a top and wins because that is more directly related to cost and has bigger impact. And that's what makes an architect. and it can happen at different layers. You can go multi-cloud above single cloud, and you can have Azure architects talking to your multi-cloud architects, and then you're comparing those cloud to cloud. What should we do this workload in AWS? Should we do this workload in GCP? And somebody has to know the different disciplines and the different details at the different tiers. So sorry, yeah, a lot of words there. Does that make sense?
Let me ask this.
Yeah.
Does we're talking about major cloud platforms, IaaS, PaaS platforms. What about just raw SaaS? If you are cobbling together multiple SaaS offerings to solve a particular set of business problems, are you also a cloud architect from that sense, or are you more akin to what Jason's saying and being a cloud solutions architect?
To me, well, cloud solutions architect doesn't tell me what your particular focus is. Now, if you're an Azure solutions architect, yeah, got it. That makes sense. I can get down with that. To me, and that's you're either building solutions or building strategy. I like Jason's key in on that word. That is starting to make me process different. Strategy long-term strategy and health versus actual implementation. To me, that's the solution architect role, and it's slightly different. It's more of a hyphenated than it's not a type of architect. It's a specific role. Does that track with you, Jason?
Yeah. And I think the ambiguity is by definition, and it's meant to be as such. What does the word architect mean? Like, it's not a hard and firm definition, right? That's part of the point. So it gives us the ability to have this discussion, but that's part of it for me. Is what is an architect? Well, it's an overarching title, but to me, it means that it's meant to be this overarching thing. You have to have some basic knowledge.
So let's segue that then into what we think an actual cloud architect does on a daily basis. And we sort of established maybe at a high level, but I'm not sure I agree with all of these points, which is why I put the little emoticon down there. But some of them I do. Design and plans a cloud solution architecture. We're back to that solution term again. Designs for security and compliance, maybe only because design is in the word. Manages implementation. I'm not sure architects manage actual implementation of anything. So I think I don't like the manage word in there. Certainly not provisioning cloud and solution infrastructure. That is not an architect to me. But this comes from Google's cloud architect certification. That these are the skills that they're looking for, and as one of the premier providers, it does make you do the little saying, is this really what a cloud architect does? I'm not so sure.
Which you say you don't, so the one you disagree with is manages? I would say almost oversight would be a better word there, to make sure that, because when you're designing and you say stuff like workloads should be here and not there except for on Tuesday or days ending with Y, if that doesn't translate very well to people without those perspectives, there's those definitions may not translate to the people that are implementing your story very well. And so you may have to give continual guidance of what you meant by do this over here and do that over here. What I'm actually trying to do is manage licensing. So make sure that you never have more than 300 connections per day, because some of the decisions we made about what's over here and what's over there and what makes those difference is how they consume license cost. And if your developers don't know how their work is having license impact, you may have to go in and explain licensing happens up here. It happens whenever you do this and this, but not this and this. That's not necessarily something a developer can see or a business analyst has visibility into, and you have to continue to maintain those defining lines so that your big picture value proposition is upheld throughout the process.
But none of what you said sounds hands-on, whereas manages sounds like, especially if you look at that fourth point, provisions of cloud infrastructure. No, no, an architect does not provision
I
anything
agree.
into
Yeah.
production. I wouldn't think that's my, and I also don't like ensures operations reliability. Audits, perhaps, reviews, but ensures, that sounds hands-on to me.
Okay, I would see that as part of your design for security and compliance, design for solution and operations reliability and stability.
Yeah, the
Agreed.
word ensure should just be plans.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Designs
So
manages doesn't work in this situation either, because that's not what it's not what an architect is meant to be doing. You know, that manages implementations for cloud architecture. That's more engineers, like you said. Manages and provisions cloud solution infrastructure. Again, that's there should be a separation of duties in these situations. Let's be honest. If we're talking small business, you're talking 5-person company.
Yep.
It's a different thing than if you're talking about a 200 person and above. That's where I look at the break point for that type of thing. Is you want separation of duties. You want somebody who's managing these things, who's not sitting there only thinking about the strategy and the planning and looking at that long-term vision of where things are going. And that's where we are at this point from a cloud architecture perspective. Is you should be looking at how am I moving from my legacy systems to the new cloud architecture worlds of the future, not just of today, but how do I look at what just got announced to build, right? All the things that we just finished talking about, like that's what an architect should be paying attention to, is where are we going on that 3 to 5 year roadmap of Microsoft, Google, Amazon, whatever it is. What are we looking at? Where are we going? And what things should we be trying out? And what things should we be planning for as an interim step along the way in order to be able to make the decision, do I want to do that or do I not want to do that? Right? Taking a look at all of those types of decisions. So,
see, I kind of think of architects just in my mind as like this should be a one pinch role. Like when you're looking at a map, right, and you need to zoom in, an architect should never be more than one pinch out, right? So they should be like the 15 to 30,000 foot level,
Yep.
right? I'm
City
going to
view.
go
Yep.
in. That's as far as I'm going in, right?
Yep.
Beyond that is engineers, right? Now we're getting all the way down into the deep stuff. And if we think about the certification path, though, because I looked at what Google is doing, very similar to what Azure doing, is their architect roles requires you to certify all the way up the chain from very deep, right, all the way up to get to that role. And I just don't see that that's effective or even proper. That you would go from this fully deep and try and get up to a higher level. I don't think that it's a differentiation of skills. Architects need to be a bit disconnected. They need to be paying attention to macro trends, right? They need to be paying attention to, as Jason said, directions and the way things are going, and ingesting a lot of new information and synthesizing that, not figuring out how to actually turn the dials and press the buttons.
I agree, and I think we may be. So I'm 100% behind where we're getting on the definition, especially the one pinch, and having just a fair amount of high perspective, medium perspective. Do you think the reality again? If I had a dime for every cloud architect position I was offered on LinkedIn that included coding in JavaScript, I could retire today. So I think that some of the definition is getting blurred because of the lack of purist roles. You can't go in and there's not a whole lot of projects or companies that are of the size that can afford a one pinch cloud architect. They are usually in one particular cloud, not necessarily multi-cloud. The project is only implementing one cloud, not implementing multi-cloud. And so to have that cloud architect title, it's probably pretty rare air that you just have what we're calling the academic version of cloud architect. You're a cloud architect / engineer, a cloud architect, or you're just a full stack unicorn. You can do it all. You can configure Azure and you can write Excel macros.
So I want to jump in for a minute because I want to draw us back 10 years. Okay. And let's think back to when we were all on-prem right? There was none of this concept of the cloud back then, right? And we may have to go for a little bit further back. Maybe we need to go back 15 years, right? And when you start to think about what an architect was, there was a progression. When you looked at the certifications, just thinking about the Microsoft certifications, you went from MCSE to MCSA, not even 10 years ago, right? That next level up, that level up your career was to go from engineer to architect, right? So it was a mental progression of, I want to achieve this level, and I want to highlight the fact that when you were on-prem, you really had to have that deeper level of knowledge, right? You needed that was a requirement there. As we move out to the abstraction layer of the cloud, though, where you don't have to worry about managing your own power and knowing how the cables run from the SAN to the NAS to the to the server to the edge, and how many links do I have coming in. Like, as an architect, I had to know all of that back when I was working for the defense contractor, that I worked for 15 years ago. I had to know where things were wired in the data center, right? That was an architect's role. I had to be that level deep in order to do it, right? And I had to know the IOPS going back to my back end and my SQL servers and things of that nature as the architect for the environment, because we were truly monitoring and managing that entire world. We're not doing that anymore. When you look at cloud architecting, it's a totally different thing. It's almost like the words mean completely different things than what they did 10, 15 years ago. The evolution of the technology and the evolution of the ecosystem has defined it as such, and we have to look at it differently. And to say, hey, I have to take the engineer level certifications in order to be an architect, I would argue it's the exact opposite. I'd look at it and say, you want to go from being able to say, I can look at how a solution should be put together, to how do I dial in and build the solution, is a very different, it's a reverse from where it used to be, right? And that, to me, is the big difference in this world from where it was to where it is today. And why looking at it and saying, hey, I have a lot more respect for someone who is a multidisciplinary engineer than I do for somebody who is a multidisciplinary architect.
So
I think I agree with that.
I'm a
That's
little.
a first.
What's the difference
for this show? That Eric and I agree. Eric agrees with the pontification that I just pulled out of my butt. So.
Yeah. No, I think I'm with you. Could you give me some more concrete of what you mean of the delta between what do you give me some actual examples of what a 15-year ago architect was and did as opposed to current? And I know that technology has changed, but the stacks have deepened even when they've, everything's in the cloud, so you don't have to know networks and WANs and firewalls and stuff like that now. So an architect had to be multidisciplined in a hardware and software perspective, and then started building up multiple stacks, and now the stacks are on the cloud, so it's easier. You don't have that physical, but you do still have the number of different disciplines. So talk to me about that. What are you saying is different? Is it just the technology that's changed, or the role?
Well, I'm pretty sure that, yeah. And so the role segments, right? So you don't, I'm not worried about the WAN and the LAN, all of that. I'm not worried about how am I wiring the fiber from the server to the SAN and all of those things. I had to know all of that back, when I built out the server room at the defense contractor. Literally had to know all of those things. Where are my runs? Man, I had to go and spend, several $100,000 to get new trenches dug into the facility to be able to bring in new fiber, because it wasn't that, the internal of the server room wasn't working right, but because in order to get to the outside network from the buildings, we made too many hops. We were going literally through 7 buildings. And so our performance was slow. And so the way to deal with that was we literally had to blow out a wall, dig new fiber through, have them rebuild the wall in order to bring in new panels and new everything into the data center in order to make, that was the type of role that the architect had to have, was understanding the end user experience, coming all the way back in over networking and all of those things, worrying about, well, how is it for people over in the UK? What things do I need to be thinking about from hops? And again, thinking about it, this is before the Akamai world and all of those things. where we're shortcutting routes and all of that,
Yeah.
right? The things that you had to be concerned with managing a SharePoint, global SharePoint farm were very different back then, rather than what does a SharePoint solutions architect worry about today? What does an Azure solutions architect worry about today? Very, very different thing. Right?
Exactly. That's where I'm trying to go. That's why I'm wondering. My challenge is the complexities have shifted. Where they were very physical before, there's a lot more virtual now. And I still think an architect is dealing with the same amount and same dimensions of things, just located in different places. Because we didn't have to think about Akamai. Now we do. If everything's we didn't have to think about GDPR. Now we do.
Buy Akamai and pay for their service and make sure it's wired up to the front end of yours, and then you're done. Right? Back then, we had to worry about putting in riverbeds and all sorts of other things because we were managing all of that ourselves physically in the network. When you look at it as a cloud architect, Paul, as a Salesforce cloud architect, right? That's a cloud architect.
Mm-hmm.
But you're worrying about the single stack. You're worried about that solution that people are accessing, right? And and when we're talking about Azure, we're talking about the back-end services, we're talking about web services, whatever it is that we're talking about. But we're not, we're generally talking about the architecture for these solutions that we're trying to put out there. Again, when we were dealing with that from a SharePoint farm perspective, I had to worry about all of those things as an architect.
Well, you're on-prem. What was your dollar cost per IO to your database or to your hard drives?
Oh, gee, the dollar cost to it, I had to I had to worry about that on an annualized basis. I had a $3 million run rate for my, for my hardware and my power and my consumption and everything. But my lease patent, my lease costs were right around $3 million a year.
So, but the example I was trying to make is, once you bought the hard drives, you didn't have to pay for the IO. Now there's complexity in that. Do I use fast storage or slow storage? Am I going to Redis or am I keeping local? Am I bridging that to an S3 bucket? Or am I paying for it? Am I paying the premium up in SharePoint for my storage there? You didn't have that variety of virtual solutions and virtual licensing back in the old world. So I think I'm positing that the complexity has shifted, not disappeared. Yes, we had to do a lot of stuff back then. We have to do a lot of stuff now. All of the different stacks have a lot of different flavors. They're all licensed to, I think, just beyond what it's reasonable for people to understand so that they can charge whatever they want. And you don't get experts that can go in and really tweak licensing. And all of the different stacks license along fairly different axes. And so it's really hard to compare them and come up with a plan that says, we're going to do this in Azure and this in AWS because it's cheaper here and doing it that way. So sorry, my point was just that I still think the architect is having to do all of those slicing and dicing across different horizontals when they're solutioning. It's just different now.
I think we're also kind of saying the same thing here. The thought space has changed, right? Whereas before we had to know the innards of every Lego set and how that Lego set, how every single piece fit together and what every single piece did. Now we've got a bunch of pre-built Lego sets that we're trying to put together and borrow from one from over here and make this one work with that. And it's all about interconnections and making all the various pieces work. I don't have to think anymore about web applications and site collections and service applications and all the stuff that I used to have to think about, right? How many trusted identity providers have we configured and have we partitioned the managed metadata service and all that, right? It's just done. But now we've got to think about everything in the security and compliance center. And I've got to think about everything in Azure AD. And so there's that space is shifted upwards, I think. There are engineers who have to do that. They work for Microsoft now. It's not us, right? In this particular example, but there are other complexities that we have to think about. So sort of finalizing this thought process is, okay, well, we are all in some sort of agreement here that that an architect is not that hands-on, that they're more strategic. So in sort of militaristic terms, that would be strategic versus tactical, right? They're more strategic. But why do you need one? if you're an organization that is beginning your cloud journey, is moving from hybrid to a pure cloud, or even figuring out just the best way to implement cloud in your organization, why do you need an architect rather than just a bunch of engineers?
You need someone at the helm of the strategy to know where you're going, where you want to be going out that 3 years. Otherwise, it's responding tactically to, IOPS are slow. Let's shift from this bucket to that bucket, right? That's great. Those are the tactical day to day. That's what engineers do, and they build, right? But somebody who's looking at the long term strategy, where are we heading? What's new on the horizon? What things can we be taking advantage of? That's really, like, for a forward thinking organization. That's why you're looking for an architect.
And is that a parachute in and out role, or is that, I guess it depends on the size of the organization, is that a permanent role?
So in small organizations, I can see it being someone that, is not so much parachute in as, because that to me is drop in and then go away forever, but more that transient role where, like, on a quarterly basis could be engaged, but somebody that has domain knowledge. Like, the strategy is not something that, you want somebody different coming in every year and writing your strategy for you and saying, oh, this is where you should be going today. You want someone who understands and looks at the long term of the organization, of the company. To me, that's what a true architect is doing, because otherwise you're just, no, let's just steer the ship. That's swapping out pilots, right? And like, we can do that. That's fine. Let's just keep this direction. No, we're getting different directions now. Let's go that way. And then the original pilot comes back. No, let's keep going this. That doesn't make as much sense to me. When you're looking at strategy, you want some cohesiveness, and you want to be able to run with something for a period of time before you make a dramatic shift.
Paul, agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, so if you're not dealing with it depends on how active you are in your IT space. If IT is a service, or if IT is a value, are we just supporting the company? Then you could have a cloud architect come in and say, here are your gutters. If you cross this boundary on data, you're going to want to rethink your cloud plan. If you cross this boundary on users, then you need to rethink your cloud plan. Everything else that I foresee in your organization falls within those lines of focus, and you should be good with that. So keep eye on, your IT director, your VP, your AVP, whatever, should be keeping an eye on those, and then re-engaging. If those types of things that select your or impact your cloud or IT strategy are changing very rapidly, if you're leading the industry, if you're developing, best of breed of anything, then you probably need a cloud architect constantly adapting to where you're going. Hey, the original strategy we had did this, that was based on these two factors, those have changed. Our strategy needs to change, or we're going to be locked in and not be able to execute on it. So that's my perspective on it. It's whether or not those lines are moving or not.
So that does sound more like a permanent, sort of keeping an eye on the overall strategic direction, making sure that the things are going, between the beacons, as you say.
Yeah, if those are highly variable, I mean, if you're just selling a widget and your customer count is the only thing that's ever going to change, your employee count, your processing, your product counts, and the amount of people you want to serve, you think you have this level of growth, well, then you can predict out 5 or 10 years and say your needs aren't going to change enough for you to have a different strategy. You don't need a cloud architect. If they decide they want to quadruple their growth, okay, yeah, this won't fit, that won't fit. At that point, you would need to go someplace else. But if you're not sure you're doing that, then you don't necessarily need it. If your company, if your country's, yeah, sorry, good.
As usual, great discussion. We're out of time. As always seems to be the case. Once we really get rolling, we run out of time. No surprise. So just a few things to wrap up here with. Of course, if you are in the Microsoft 365 space, you'll want to be coming to the North American Collaboration Summit in Branson, Missouri in October. And you can learn more about that at NACS or collabsummit.org. I think, if I can remember all the different
That works.
URLs.
Yep.
Because I didn't put it on the slide like I should have done. But I will put it in the show notes. Of course, wrap up on our sponsors. Go out and grab the latest Bifocal podcast from bifocal.show to get all the information that Jason was talking about earlier. I will get those links in as well, but you definitely want to get the discussion between him and John. And then if you are in the Salesforce space, of course, you want to be part of the local Trailblazer community and the Salesforce user group that Paul runs. And look at this space for some additional announcements coming soon. We have some more exciting community Cloudcast stuff on the horizon that we'll be announcing very shortly. So guys, time's up. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Good to see you. And we'll see you next month.
See y'all later.
Thanks all.